Finley Morrow woke up to the sound of his alarm clock at exactly 6 in the morning, as he had done every weekday for the past 23 years. Blinking sleepily, he rolled over and found the empty side of the bed. Tess was already up. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and the clinking of dishes drifted in from the kitchen. The familiar sounds created the illusion of a normal morning in their home on Maple Street in Edgewood, Ohio. Finley struggled to get up, his back aching from yesterday's work in the backyard, where he had replaced some rotten boards on the porch. At 49, his body didn't recover as quickly as it used to. He slipped on his slippers and stretched, heading for the bathroom. The mirror reflected a tired face with wrinkles around his eyes and the first gray hairs at his temples. "You're getting old, buddy," he muttered to his reflection as he turned on the tap. The cold water refreshed him, washing away the last traces of sleep. Going down to the kitchen, Finley found Tess sitting at the table with a cup of coffee, staring at her phone screen. She didn't even look up when he came in. "Good morning," Finley said, walking over to the coffee maker. Tess replied indistinctly, still staring at her phone. Finley poured himself some coffee into his favorite mug with the logo of the Edgewood Tigers, the local baseball team he used to coach. In 20 years of marriage, he had grown accustomed to Tess's morning taciturnity, but in recent weeks her silence had taken on a different character. She seemed to be somewhere far away, even when she was sitting across the table from him. "Is Ella's final dress fitting today?" he asked, trying to start a conversation. Tess finally looked up from her phone, as if only now noticing his presence. "Yes, at 3 o'clock. She asked you not to be late if you decide to come with us." There was a strange note in her voice, as if she doubted he would want to be present at this important event. "Of course I'll go," Finley said, surprised. "Why wouldn't I?" Tess shrugged and buried her face in her phone again. Finley noticed her lips twitch slightly into a smile as she read another message. Something about that smile made him feel uneasy. People don't smile like that at business emails or messages from their girlfriends. At that moment, a sleepy Ella walked into the kitchen wearing pajamas with space cats on them, a gift from Finley for her 21st birthday. Even though there were only 3 weeks left until her wedding, she was still living with her parents while she and her fiancé Noah saved up for their own place. "Hi, Dad," she mumbled sleepily, kissing Finley on the cheek and heading straight for the refrigerator. Those simple words, "Hi, Dad," warmed his heart every time. Ella wasn't his biological daughter, but in the 20 years he had raised her, that difference had completely disappeared. He remembered her first day of kindergarten, her first tooth, her first scraped knee, her first school dance. He held her hand when she was afraid of the dark and was proud of her achievements on the school swim team. Finley had been there for every significant moment of her life, except the very first, her birth. "Coffee or tea?" he asked, getting up from his chair. "Coffee, big and strong," Ella replied, stifling a yawn. "Today is a crazy day. Dress fitting, meeting with the florist, and then I have to stop by Noah's to finalize the guest list." Finley smiled as he watched his grown daughter rub her eyes with her fists, just like she did when she was a child. "Don't forget we were going to discuss music for your first dance tonight," he reminded her. Ella and Noah had asked him to help them choose a song for their first dance as husband and wife, since Finley had once played in a band and had good taste. "Oh, about that," Ella hesitated, glancing quickly at her mother. "I think we should do that another day. I just don't have the energy today." Something about the way she exchanged glances with Tess struck Finley as odd, but he decided not to read too much into it. "Sure, no problem," he agreed. "You've got so much to do before the wedding." The mention of the wedding brought another wave of pride and slight sadness. His little girl was getting married, and although he sincerely loved Noah and considered him a worthy young man, the thought of Ella starting a completely adult, independent life made him feel nostalgic for the days when she was little and carefree. After breakfast, Finley went to work. For the past 15 years, he had been working as a manager at Harris Hardware, a construction supply store. Nothing fancy, but a stable job with good pay and benefits. It was enough to provide his family with a comfortable life in a cozy 3-bedroom house with a small but well-kept garden. The day at the store passed as usual, advising customers, checking new deliveries, resolving minor conflicts between employees. Finley loved his job for its predictability and the opportunity to help people solve practical problems. Closer to lunchtime, Tess called. "Finley, my plans have changed," she said without preamble. "I'm meeting a friend for lunch, so I'll pick you up at the store at 2:30 and we'll go dress shopping together." "Which friend?" Finley asked mechanically. There was a short pause. "Diana. You don't know her, she just moved into our neighborhood." Something in Tess's voice sounded false, but Finley didn't pursue the matter. "Okay, I'll wait for you at the entrance." At 2:30 p.m., Finley stood at the entrance to Harris Hardware, watching the cars go by. Tess was late, which was unlike her. Usually punctual to a fault, she had become forgetful and distracted in recent weeks. When her silver Toyota Camry finally pulled up, Finley noticed that Tess looked more animated than she had in the morning. Her blonde hair was styled elegantly, and her lips were glossy with fresh lipstick, details she didn't usually bother to touch up during the day. "Sorry I'm late," she said as he got into the car. "My meeting with Diana ran late." Finley caught the unfamiliar scent of perfume wafting through the car. It wasn't the perfume Tess usually wore. On the way to the Eternal Love wedding salon, Tess was unusually talkative, telling him about Ella's plans for the venue, the flower arrangements, and the menu. But behind the torrent of words, Finley sensed a nervousness, as if she were trying to fill the space to avoid other, more difficult topics. Ella was already waiting for them at the salon with her best friend and maid of honor, Zoe. When Ella came out of the fitting room in her wedding dress, Finley felt a lump in his throat. She looked so grown up, so beautiful. The dress accentuated her slender figure, and soft waves of chestnut hair framed her face, making her look like Tess when she was younger. "Well?" Ella asked, nervously fingering the edge of her veil. "You look stunning," Finley replied sincerely. "So you definitely want me to walk you down the aisle?" he asked, surprising himself with the question and feeling a strange sense of anticipation. Ella hesitated, glancing quickly at her mother. "Yes, of course, Dad. Who else?" But something in her tone and the look she exchanged with Tess made Finley feel that they were hiding something. That evening, when they returned home, Finley decided to check the mail that Tess usually left on the table in the hall. Among the bills and advertising brochures, he found a postcard with unfamiliar handwriting addressed to Tess and Ella. The postcard had been sent from Portland, Oregon, and was signed simply, "See you soon, you." "Tess," he called to his wife as he entered the living room with the postcard in his hand. "Who's you?" Tess, who was sitting on the sofa, looked up sharply. For a split second, Finley saw fear in her eyes, which she quickly tried to hide. "Oh, that's," she stammered. "It's from Warren, Ella's cousin. Remember, I told you about him? He's coming to the wedding." Finley frowned, trying to remember a Warren among Tess's relatives. In 20 years of marriage, he had gotten to know her entire family, and there was no cousin named Warren among them. "I don't remember him," he said slowly, looking intently at his wife. Tess was clearly nervous, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the pillow. "Well, he's a very distant relative. We haven't seen each other in years." Finley wanted to ask more questions, but at that moment, Tess's phone rang. Glancing at the screen, she quickly stood up. "Sorry, I have to take this. It's work." She hurried into the kitchen, closing the door behind her. Finley heard her voice change. It became quieter, softer, with a hint of intimacy that hadn't been present in their conversations for a very long time. That same evening, while Tess was taking a shower, Finley accidentally noticed her purse, carelessly thrown on a chair. Usually neat and tidy, Tess never left her things lying around the house. Obeying a sudden impulse that he couldn't explain even to himself, Finley opened the purse. Among her cosmetics, wallet, and set of keys, he found a small package of condoms, new, unopened. Finley froze, holding his find in his hands. He and Tess hadn't used condoms in years. After several unsuccessful attempts to have a child together, Finley had a vasectomy. It was their mutual decision. Tess didn't want any more children, and he agreed, even though deep down he had always dreamed of having a son. Hearing that the water in the shower had stopped running, Finley quickly put the package back in the bag and walked over to the window, pretending to look at the evening street. His heart was pounding like crazy, and dozens of questions swirled in his head, questions he was afraid to find the answers to. "What are you thinking about?" asked Tess, entering the room in a bathrobe with a towel on her head. "Just thinking about the wedding," lied Finley. "I can't believe our little girl is getting married." Tess smiled, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Yes, time flies." That night, Finley lay awake for a long time, listening to his wife's steady breathing. They had lived together for 20 years, sharing joys and sorrows, dreams and disappointments. He had adopted Ella when she was only 5 years old, accepting her as his own daughter. At the time, it had seemed like the natural thing to do. He loved Tess and wanted to be a real family. Finley knew little about Ella's biological father. Tess didn't like to talk about him, and he didn't press her. Weston Greer, that was his name, had abandoned Tess when he found out she was pregnant. He simply disappeared from her life, leaving no address or phone number. Finley had always considered him a coward and a selfish man, unworthy of a woman like Tess and a daughter like Ella. Now, lying in the dark, Finley wondered for the first time, what if Weston had returned? What if the mysterious "you" on the postcard was him? And why had Tess bought condoms? Thoughts swirled in his head, keeping him awake, and a heavy premonition of change grew in his chest, about to burst into their orderly life and destroy everything he thought was unbreakable. Saturday morning was cloudy, with a light rain falling on the roof of the Morrow house. Finley sat at the kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee, looking over the wedding guest list. The celebration was less than 3 weeks away, and minor organizational details required his attention. His smartphone vibrated, a message from his son Ethan, who lived 2 hours away from Edgewood with his wife Clara and their young daughter. "Dad, we'll definitely be there by 6. Clara took Friday off so we can help with the last-minute preparations. How are you guys doing?" Finley smiled. Ethan was his son from his first marriage, which had ended in turmoil before he met Tess. Despite the distance, they maintained a warm relationship, and Ethan and his family visited regularly. "Everything's fine. Getting ready," Finley typed, pausing before sending. He wanted to mention Tess's strange behavior and his suspicions, but held back. There was no point in worrying his son with his assumptions, which might turn out to be just his imagination. The front door slammed and Tess entered the house, holding an umbrella over her head. She was wearing a new dress that Finley had never seen before, and high-heeled shoes, an outfit too dressy for a Saturday shopping trip. "You're early," Finley remarked. "You said you'd be late because of the sale at Macy's." Tess took off her shoes and put the wet umbrella in the stand. "It was so crowded I decided not to waste my time," she said, walking into the kitchen and opening the refrigerator, avoiding her husband's gaze. "Did Ella call?" "No, she's at Noah's, discussing something about the wedding." Tess nodded, taking out a bottle of water. "Finley," she began in an unusually cautious tone, "we need to talk." Something in her voice made him tense. In 20 years of marriage, he had learned to recognize his wife's intonations. This tone did not bode well. "I'm listening," he replied, putting down his phone. Tess sat down opposite him, nervously twirling her wedding ring, a habit that only appeared when she was very upset. "You know that the upcoming wedding is a special event for Ella," she began, "and she wants everything to be perfect." Finley nodded silently, not understanding where she was going with this. "Anyway," Tess took a deep breath, "Weston is back." Two simple words, but they rang in his ears as if someone had struck a gong right above his head. "Weston?" Finley asked, even though he had heard and understood perfectly well. "Ella's father?" Tess nodded, turning pale before his eyes. "He contacted me a month ago. He found me on social media. He said he wanted to see Ella before her wedding. A month ago, and she's only telling me now." Finley felt a cold emptiness growing inside him. "And you decided to keep this from me?" he asked quietly. "I wanted to talk to him first, to understand what he wanted. He's been gone for 20 years and now he suddenly shows up. And what does he want?" Finley tried to sound calm even though anger was boiling inside him. Tess looked away. "He regrets the past. He says he's grown up and rethought a lot of things. He wants to mend his relationship with his daughter." "After 20 years?" Finley couldn't hide his sarcasm. How convenient. He waited until someone else raised his child, and now he's decided to repair the relationship. "Finley, I understand how you feel," Tess looked upset, "but this is my decision too. Ella has a right to know who her real father is." The word real stung like a whip. For 20 years, he had been a father to Ella, driving her to school, helping her with her homework, teaching her to ride a bike, sitting by her bed when she was sick, supporting her through her first heartbreaks. And now he was suddenly no longer real? "Where is he now?" Finley asked, clenching his fists under the table. "He's staying at the River Inn. He arrived yesterday." Tess licked her dry lips. "We agreed to meet tonight. Me, him, and Ella. I think you should come too." Her words rang hollow. If Tess really wanted him there, she wouldn't have kept it a secret for a whole month. Finley suddenly realized that she had made this decision without him, behind his back. And Ella knew it too, and she hadn't said a word. "Sure," he replied dryly, getting up from the table. "Where and when?" 7 o'clock at the Olive Grove restaurant. Finley nodded and left the kitchen, feeling the ground crumble beneath his feet. He stood in the bathroom for a long time, leaning against the sink, staring at his reflection. The thought kept spinning in his head. So that's what the condoms were for. The thought made him feel sick. At 7 o'clock sharp, they were sitting at a table in the Olive Grove, one of the best restaurants in Edgewood, where Tess and he usually only went on special occasions. Ella nervously fiddled with her napkin, glancing anxiously at the door. Tess looked unusually young and lively, as if she had shed a decade. Finley silently sipped his beer, feeling out of place at this celebration of life. "There he is," Tess whispered, her eyes lighting up with such excitement that Finley's chest ached. A tall man in his 50s was approaching their table, dressed in an expensive suit and walking with the confident gait of someone accustomed to attention. Weston Greer was exactly as Finley had always imagined him, handsome, charismatic, like an actor in an expensive watch commercial, and so unlike Finley himself, with his simple middle-class working-class appearance. "Tess," Weston smiled radiantly, showing off his perfect teeth, "you haven't changed a bit." He kissed her hand gallantly, and Finley noticed Tess blush like a little girl. "And you must be Ella." Weston turned to his daughter, his eyes sparkling suspiciously. "My God, you're beautiful. All your mother's." Ella smiled awkwardly, clearly unsure how to react to this stranger who had suddenly become part of her life. Finally, Weston noticed Finley. "And you must be Finley," he said, extending his hand. "Thank you for taking care of my family. My family." The words made Finley's face flush. With great effort, he shook the outstretched hand, feeling Weston deliberately squeeze his palm, a small act of domination. It was nothing, Finley managed to say. Dinner turned into a surreal spectacle. Weston enthusiastically talked about his life, about the company he had founded in Seattle, his travels through Europe and Asia, his house with an ocean view. He skillfully wove compliments about Tess and Elle into his story, constantly emphasizing their beauty and intelligence. Finley watched silently as both women literally melted under his attention. "What do you do, Finley?" Weston finally asked, sipping the expensive wine he had ordered. "I'm a manager at a hardware store," Finley replied simply. "Oh, that's interesting." Weston couldn't hide a condescending smile. "Honest work." At that moment, Finley realized with acute clarity how this evening, this week, this whole story would unfold. Weston Greer, a successful businessman, handsome, charming, had returned to take back what he believed was his. And judging by Tess's adoring glances, he was doing a pretty good job of it. When dessert was served, the conversation turned to the wedding. "I'm so glad I made it back in time for this important day," Weston said, looking at Ella. "You know, I've often imagined myself walking my daughter down the aisle." An awkward silence fell. Ella lowered her eyes and Tess cleared her throat nervously. Finley felt his breath catch in his throat. "Actually," he said quietly, "Ella asked me to walk her down the aisle." Weston was momentarily taken aback, but quickly regained his composure. "Of course, it's her decision," he smiled with feigned magnanimity. "I just expressed a wish." After dinner, they went outside. The rain had stopped, but the air was damp and heavy. "I have an idea," Weston said excitedly. "Why don't we go out for a drink? The evening is just beginning." "I have to get up early tomorrow," Finley objected. "I need to finish the work on the terrace." "On Sunday?" Weston was surprised. "Well, workaholics always deserve respect. Tess, Ella, are you with me?" "I'd like to," Ella began uncertainly, looking at Finley, "but I promised Noah I'd call him." "Noah will understand," Tess interrupted, strangely enthusiastic. "We won't be long. Just one drink." Finley watched his wife and daughter walk away with Weston. Three figures walking down the wet sidewalk laughing at some joke. He suddenly felt old, tired, and completely useless. At home, he lay awake for a long time, tossing and turning in his empty bed. Tess returned well after midnight. She smelled of alcohol and unfamiliar men's cologne. She slipped quietly into the bathroom and then lay down on her side of the bed, trying not to wake her husband. Finley pretended to be asleep, not wanting a conversation that could lead to an argument. The next day, Weston showed up at their house with a huge bouquet for Tess and a gift for Ella, an elegant gold bracelet, just like the one I gave your mother. Ella's eyes lit up with delight as she tried on the jewelry. "By the way, I've decided to stay in Edgewood until the wedding," Weston announced at dinner. "I've rented a cottage near the lake. You must come visit." With each passing day, Weston became more and more involved in their lives. He invited Tess and Ella to restaurants, took them shopping, helped with the wedding arrangements, and generously paid for all the extra expenses. His prestigious black Audi was often parked outside their house, and the sound of his low, booming laughter echoed through their living room in the evenings. Finley stayed late at work more and more often, feeling like a stranger in his own home. His colleagues noticed the change in his mood, but he dismissed it as pre-wedding jitters. He couldn't even explain the real reason for his anguish to himself. How could he tell anyone that his family had been stolen by a ghost from the past? One evening, when he came home from work, Finley found Tess, Ella, and Weston looking at old family photo albums. They were sitting on the sofa, huddled together, laughing at pictures of little Ella. "Here you are when you were 2, said Tess, pointing to a photo. "You just started walking." "She has my eyes," Weston remarked proudly. "And my chin, too." Finley quietly slipped into the kitchen, trying not to catch their eye. He poured himself a whiskey and drank it in one gulp, feeling the alcohol burn his throat. No one even noticed he had come in. No one asked how his day had been. No one waited for him with dinner, as they used to. He felt like a ghost in his own home. With 10 days to go before the wedding, the thing Finley feared most happened. He and Ella were sitting on the porch, discussing the final details of the ceremony. Finley laid out the seating plan he had drawn up for the caterers. "Dad," Ella began in an unusually serious tone, "I need to talk to you." Finley looked up from his papers and met his daughter's gaze. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of guilt and determination. "I don't know how to say this," she faltered. "Well, I want Weston to walk me down the aisle." The words hung heavy in the air. Finley felt something break inside him. "I understand," he said quietly, surprised at his own calmness. "He's your father." "You're my father too," Ella added hastily, reaching for his hand. "It's just, you know, he missed so much, and this is like a chance to make it right." Finley nodded silently, not trusting his voice. What could he say? That he felt betrayed? That 20 years of fatherhood had suddenly been devalued by the appearance of a biological sperm donor who had decided to play daddy? "I hope you're not offended." Ella looked alarmed by his silence. "It's okay," Finley lied. "It's your day, and you should decide who walks you down the aisle." "Thank you, Dad." Ella threw her arms around him, hugging him like she did when she was a child. "I knew you'd understand." But Finley didn't understand. All he felt was a dull, numbing pain, as if he'd been punched in the gut. He spent the entire evening in the garage, tinkering with his old motorcycle, a hobby that helped distract him from his dark thoughts. Late at night, when Tess was already asleep, Finley found her phone on the kitchen table. The screen lit up with a message. "I can't wait for tomorrow. I miss you already. You." Finley stared at the words for a long time, feeling his last illusions crumble to dust. He wasn't a naive man. He understood perfectly well what was going on between his wife and Weston. The discovery of condoms, the late nights, Tess's sparkling eyes, everything pointed to the obvious. The next morning at breakfast, Tess announced that she and Ella were going out of town to try on custom-made wedding shoes. "We'll be back late. Don't wait up for us," she added, not looking her husband in the eye. Finley just nodded, finishing his cold coffee. He was too tired to fight the obvious. His family was slipping away from him, and there was nothing he could do about it. Weston Greer, with his money, charm, and status as biological father, had won without even trying. That evening, Finley sat in the empty house, looking through old photos on his phone. Ella at a school play, a family trip to the mountains, her first prom. How many moments they had shared, how many memories they had made together. And now it was all gone, ruined by one man who had decided to come back after 20 years of absence. The phone rang. Ethan's name lit up on the screen. "Hi, Dad." His son's voice sounded cheerful. "How are you? Getting ready for the wedding?" "Yes," Finley replied curtly. "Everything's going according to plan." "Is something wrong?" Ethan immediately sensed something was wrong. "You sound strange." Finley sighed. He had never been good at hiding his feelings from his son. "Ella's biological father is back," he said, "and now he's walking her down the aisle." There was silence on the other end of the line. "Shit," Ethan finally said. "How are you?" "I'm fine." Finley tried to sound cheerful. "It's her decision, and I respect it." "Dad," Ethan's voice sounded alarmed, "if you want, I can come earlier, this weekend." "No, don't." Finley felt guilty for dragging his son into his problems. "Everything's under control. See you as planned, the day before the wedding." After ending the call, Finley went out to the back porch and stared at the stars for a long time, thinking about how quickly life could change. Just a month ago, he had been a happy husband and father, preparing for the joyous occasion of his daughter's wedding. Now he felt like a stranger in his own family, an uninvited guest at a celebration of life. With each passing day, the gap grew wider and the pain of betrayal grew sharper. Finley woke up to the sound of the front door slamming. The clock on the bedside table showed 2 in the morning. He listened to Tess's footsteps as she tried to climb the stairs quietly. The bathroom door creaked and the sound of running water filled the room. Finley closed his eyes, pretending to be asleep. When Tess finally slipped under the covers, she smelled of mint toothpaste and the faint scent of men's cologne, Weston's. He lay motionless, listening to his wife's breathing gradually even out. 20 years of marriage, and this was where they had ended up. Secret meetings, deception, and silence filled with unspoken accusations. Finley didn't know what hurt more, his wife's betrayal or Ella's decision to give her biological father the honor of walking her down the aisle. There were 5 days left until the wedding. Finley felt a decision slowly forming inside him. He couldn't stay in a house where no one seemed to notice him anymore. He couldn't watch Weston push him further and further out of the family he had considered his own for 20 years. At breakfast, Ella chattered about the final preparations for the wedding. Tess, unusually lively for someone who had spent most of the night out, kept the conversation going. Finley drank his coffee in silence, feeling invisible. "Uncle Robert confirmed that he's coming," Ella said, looking at her phone. "And Weston offered to pay for the fireworks after the ceremony. Isn't that great?" Tess nodded energetically. "Definitely. It'll be a wonderful surprise for the guests." "What do you think, Dad?" Ella addressed Finley for the first time that morning. He looked up from his coffee cup. "Do whatever you want," he replied, trying to keep his voice neutral. Something in his tone made Ella frown. "Dad, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," Finley lied. "Just a lot of work to do before the wedding." "You're not upset about," she faltered, "about my decision about—" "I already said everything's fine," Finley interrupted more sharply than he intended. "It's your wedding and your decision." An awkward pause ensued. Tess nervously tapped her fingernails on the table. "By the way, I'm meeting Weston today." Ella broke the silence. "He wants to show me a wedding gift. He says it's a surprise." "Don't be late for your appointment with the florist," Tess reminded her. "At 4 o'clock. "Don't worry." Ella finished her tea. "Weston promised to drive me straight to the flower shop, and then we'll go and look at the photo shoot location again." Finley felt something tighten inside him. Just a few weeks ago, they had been making all these preparations together, choosing the location for the photo shoot, discussing the menu, planning the music. Now, Weston had replaced him. "I have to get to work," Finley said, getting up from the table. Neither Tess nor Ella even looked up, continuing to discuss wedding plans. The day at the store dragged on agonizingly. Finley went through the motions of his duties, advising customers, checking invoices, dealing with minor organizational issues, but his mind was far away. Over and over again, the events of the past few weeks replayed in his head. Weston's appearance, Tess's strange behavior, Ella's decision. His whole life, so stable and predictable, had suddenly collapsed. After work, Finley didn't go home. He wandered around the city park for a long time, trying to collect his thoughts. His feet led him to the lake where he and Ella used to feed the ducks. He remembered how little Ella laughed when the ducks snatched bread right out of her hands, how she asked him to protect her from the scary geese. He was her hero back then. And now? Returning home later that evening, Finley found the house empty. On the kitchen table was a note in Tess's hurried handwriting. "Went out with Ella to get a wedding bouquet, then dinner with Weston. Don't wait up. Food's in the fridge." They hadn't even called. They didn't ask if he wanted to join them. They just presented him with a fait accompli. Finley crumpled up the note and threw it in the trash can. Then he went up to his bedroom and took a large travel bag out of the closet. The decision that had been brewing for several days had finally taken shape. He couldn't stay here any longer, in a house that had become foreign to him. He couldn't watch the woman he had loved for 20 years fall in love with another man. He couldn't stand feeling invisible to his own family. He methodically packed his things, a few shirts, jeans, underwear, toiletries, only the bare essentials. He could pick up the rest later. In a drawer, Finley found an old photograph of himself and Ella, both smiling as they stood on top of a mountain during their only hike together. Ella was 12 at the time. He stared at the photo for a long time, then carefully placed it in his bag. Finley left 2 envelopes on the desk in his study, one for Tess, the other for Ella. In the letter to his wife, he briefly informed her of his decision to leave, asked her not to look for him, and wished her happiness with Weston if that was truly what she wanted. The letter to Ella was more difficult. Finley started and tore up what he had written several times, not knowing how to explain his departure to his daughter without accusing her of betrayal. In the end, the letter was short. He wrote that he loved her, that he would always consider her his daughter, but that he needed time and space. He promised to return for the wedding if she still wanted him to be among the guests. Finley finished the letters, got into his old Ford, and drove away without looking back at the house where he had spent 20 years. He headed for the only person he could turn to in such a situation, his brother Gary, who lived on the other side of Edgewood. Gary, who had been through 2 divorces, would understand without asking any questions. At that moment, Ella was sitting at a table in the Morning Dew Cafe, nervously checking the time on her phone. Weston, who had promised to meet her at 6 o'clock, was already 40 minutes late. She had sent him 3 messages and called him twice, but there was no answer. Finally, her phone vibrated. "Sorry, baby. Urgent business. Let's reschedule for tomorrow?" Ella sighed. This was the 3rd time in the last few days that Weston had changed his plans at the last minute. Despite her initial charm, she was beginning to notice traits in her biological father that she didn't like. He was impulsive, a little selfish, and seemed to make promises he didn't always keep. The comparison with Finley, reliable, always punctual, always keeping his word, was obvious. Finley never canceled their plans, was never late, never forgot about events that were important to her. Guilt pricked her heart as she remembered their morning conversation and the pain in her stepfather's eyes. "Okay," she replied to Weston and paid for her untouched coffee. Ella decided to stop by her fiancé Noah's place. She needed to talk to someone who could understand her mixed feelings. Noah lived in a small rented apartment on the outskirts of Edgewood, saving money for their future home together. "I can't believe he canceled again," Ella said, sitting on the couch in Noah's living room. "That's the 3rd time this week." Noah, a tall, dark-haired guy with kind eyes, put his arm around her shoulders. "Maybe he really does have something going on," he suggested. "You said he has his own company." "Maybe," Ella nodded. "It's just strange. He was so insistent on meeting, talking about a surprise, and now he's canceled again. And then there's—" She faltered. "What?" Noah looked at her intently. "I think I hurt my dad. Finley, I mean," she corrected herself. "He's been acting so strange lately. He hardly talks and stays late at work all the time." "What did you expect?" Noah asked gently. "You replaced him with another man at one of the most important moments of your life. Of course he's hurt." Ella lowered her eyes. Noah was right. In the excitement of meeting her biological father, she hadn't thought about the feelings of the man who had been her father for 20 years. "Do you think I should apologize? Tell him I've changed my mind?" Noah shrugged. "It's your decision, Ella. You have to do what you think is right, not what others expect of you." After talking to Noah, Ella decided to stop by her house to talk to Finley. She felt she needed to explain herself, to tell him how much she appreciated everything he had done for her. But as she approached the house, She noticed that Finley's car wasn't in its usual spot. Instead, Weston's familiar black Audi was parked outside. That's strange, Ella thought. He canceled our meeting because of urgent business. She parked and quietly entered the house. Voices came from the kitchen, her mother and Weston. They were speaking quietly, but the sounds echoed in the empty house. "He suspects something," Tess said in an agitated voice. "He hardly talks to me and looks at me strangely." "What does it matter?" Weston replied carelessly. "We'll tell him everything after the wedding, or have you changed your mind?" "No, of course not," Tess replied hastily. "It's just, we've been together for so many years. I don't want to hurt him." Weston snorted. "Tess, 20 years ago you chose stability. I understand. A single mother with a small child. You had to think about the future. But now Ella is grown up. We can finally be together, as we always should have been." Ella froze, unable to believe her ears. They planned to tell Finley everything after the wedding? To leave together? To abandon the man who had been the rock of their family for 20 years? "What about Ella?" Tess asked. "How will she react when she finds out that we—" "She's a grown woman," Weston interrupted. "Besides, she already chose me, didn't she? I'll be walking her down the aisle, not Finley." Ella's stomach clenched at his words. She felt nauseous. Not wanting to hear any more, she quietly left the house and got into her car. Her hands were shaking so badly that she couldn't start the engine right away. Ella drove off without a destination, just to get away from home, from her mother, from Weston. Her thoughts were jumbled. She remembered how happy she had been when her biological father appeared, how easily she had rejected Finley without thinking about his feelings. And all for what? For a man who saw her only as a means of getting his wife back? Without realizing where she was going, Ella found herself near the Pine Grove Motel on the outskirts of town. She slowed down when she noticed a black Audi parked near one of the rooms. Weston's car. But how? He had just been at her house with her mother, and then she remembered. She had overheard their conversation in the kitchen 2 hours earlier when she had stopped by before meeting Noah. So they had come here after that. Together. To the motel. Ella felt a lump rise in her throat. She suddenly imagined how it must look from Finley's perspective, his wife and daughter captivated by the reappearance of the man who abandoned them 20 years ago, gradually distancing themselves from him, ignoring him, replacing him in family matters. And now this. When she returned home late that evening, Ella found the house quiet and empty. On the table in the hall was an envelope with her name on it. Inside was a short letter from Finley. She read the lines and tears rolled down her cheeks. He had left. He couldn't take it. He had broken under the weight of betrayal. Ella rushed to her parents' bedroom. Finley's closet doors were open. Several hangers were empty. His shaving kit, toothbrush, and aftershave were gone from the bathroom. "What's going on here?" Tess stood in the bedroom doorway watching her daughter rush about. "He's gone." Ella handed her mother the letter. "Dad left because of you." "Because of us?" "What do you mean?" Tess asked, her eyes scanning the lines. "Don't pretend," Ella shouted. "I know everything. I heard you talking to Weston in the kitchen, and I saw his car at the Pine Grove Motel. You're disgusting." Tess turned pale and sank onto the bed. "Ella, it's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think?" Ella couldn't contain her anger. "What were you and Weston planning behind my father's back? To wait until my wedding and then leave him? After 20 years of marriage? Your father and I—" "He's not my father," Ella interrupted. "My father is Finley. The man who raised me, loved me, was always there for me. And Weston is just a selfish jerk who came out of nowhere and destroyed our family." Tess sat on the bed, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders were shaking. "I made a terrible mistake," she whispered. "I'm so confused. When Weston showed up, it was like being young again. He's so So bright, so confident. Being with him made me feel young and desirable again. What about Dad? Ella asked quietly. Have you thought about him? About the man who loved you for 20 years, cared for you, raised someone else's child as his own? Tess lifted her tear-stained face. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't know what to do. Weston said he had always loved me, that he regretted leaving every day for 20 years. And you believed him? Ella smiled bitterly. If he really regretted it, he wouldn't have disappeared for 20 years. He only came back now, when all the difficulties are behind us, when I've grown up. Can't you see that? Ella sat down next to her mother, suddenly feeling older and wiser. Mom, we have to find Dad. We have to apologize, explain. He won't answer, Tess shook her head. I called him several times. His phone is off. Then we have to wait, Ella said firmly, and pray that he forgives us. That night, Ella couldn't sleep. She lay in her old room staring at the ceiling and thinking about how quickly everything she had built over the years was falling apart. Just a month ago, she had been a happy bride-to-be, preparing for her wedding surrounded by her loving family. Now her father had left home, her mother was devastated and ashamed, and her biological father had turned out to be a selfish manipulator. What would happen to the wedding? The thought of the ceremony without Finley was unbearable, but it was impossible to cancel everything 4 days before the date. The guests were already on their way, some flying in from other states. At dawn, Ella made a decision. Whatever the wedding would be, she wanted Finley to be there, not as a guest, but as the father who would walk her down the aisle. That is, if he still wanted to after everything that had happened. The leaves on the trees were turning golden and crimson, and the air was filled with freshness and coolness. 4 months had flown by unnoticed. Finley parked his pickup truck outside a small cottage on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, where he had settled after leaving Tess. After unloading the groceries, he headed for the house, greeting a neighbor watering his well-manicured lawn. Life had settled down, though not right away. After leaving Edgewood, Finley spent several weeks on the road, driving around the country with no particular destination in mind. He stayed in cheap motels, ate at roadside diners, and spent hours staring at the ocean or the mountains, trying to make sense of what had happened and find a new direction. He ended up in Portland, where his son Ethan lived with his family. He had planned to stay for a few days, but his son convinced him to stay longer and then to stay for good. As he entered the house, Finley was putting away his groceries when the phone rang. The screen lit up with Ella's name. After the wedding, she had tried to contact him several times, but he wasn't ready to talk. Gradually, they began to communicate, first through text messages, then short phone calls. Now they talked regularly, about her new life with Noah, about work, about everything except Tess and the events leading up to the wedding. They silently avoided that topic. "Hi, Dad," Ella's voice sounded cheerful. "How are you?" "Everything's fine," Finley replied with a smile. Despite the distance and what had happened, he still considered her his daughter. "Just got back from the store. It's Ethan and Clara's anniversary today, so I'm going to make them a special dinner." "You've always been the best cook in the family," Ella said with a smile in her voice. "Give them my best wishes." "I will," Finley paused. "How are you and Noah? Everything okay?" "Yes, everything's great," Ella replied. "Noah got a promotion and I'm starting a new project at the studio, but that's not why I called. Dad, she faltered. "I miss you. We all do." Finley knew that by all, she meant Tess too. His heart ached. "I miss you too," he replied honestly, "but I need more time." "I understand," Ella said quickly. "Just know that you can always come back. Or we can come visit." "Maybe," Finley replied evasively. The thought of returning to Edgewood, of seeing Tess, still caused him pain. They talked for a few more minutes about everyday things, and then Finley hung up, lost in thought. He wasn't angry with Ella. He had forgiven her long ago. After all, She just wanted to know who her biological father was and who could blame her. As for Tess, that was more complicated. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of shared memories, joys and sorrows, all wiped out by betrayal. Finley didn't know if he could ever truly forgive her. He was distracted from his dark thoughts by the doorbell. Standing on the doorstep was Ethan, a tall man of 35 who looked so much like Finley when he was younger. "Hi, Dad. You haven't forgotten about dinner tonight, have you? Clara's mom is coming too." "How could I forget?" Finley smiled, hugging his son. "I've already started cooking. And yes, I remember Margaret." Margaret Pierce, Clara's mother, was a widow in her early 50s, an intelligent woman with a soft voice and kind eyes. Finley had met her at his granddaughter's birthday party a month ago, but they had barely exchanged a few words. Today, he would get to know her better. "I still don't understand why you arranged this dinner," Finley grumbled, although deep down he was grateful to his son for trying to pull him out of his self-imposed seclusion. "Because you need to socialize more, not just with me and Clara," Ethan replied simply. "And besides, Margaret is lonely too. You'll have something to talk about." "I'm not looking for a replacement for your mother or Tess," Finley warned. "I'm not suggesting that," Ethan shrugged. "Just a friendly dinner. No pressure." That evening, the house was filled with the aromas of home cooking and the sounds of soft music. Finley was setting the table when the guests arrived. Clara, a petite blonde with a lively personality, immediately rushed to help in the kitchen. She was followed by Margaret, an elegant woman with chestnut hair streaked with gray, pulled back in a simple bun. She was carrying a bottle of wine and a bouquet of wildflowers. "Good evening, Finley," she said with a slight smile. "Thank you for inviting us." "Actually, it was Ethan's idea," Finley replied honestly, accepting the flowers. "But I'm glad you came." Dinner was warm and relaxed. Ethan told funny stories from work, and Clara shared news about her daughter who was staying with a babysitter that night. Finley and Margaret mostly listened, occasionally adding comments. He stole glances at her smile, the way she neatly cut a piece of steak, the way she thoughtfully swirled her glass of wine. She exuded an inner dignity and quiet strength. "Finley, the steak is delicious," Margaret praised him. "You're an excellent cook." "Thank you," he said, slightly embarrassed. "Cooking has always been my hobby. It helps me relax." "I understand. Painting has become my hobby," she said, taking a sip of wine. "After my husband died, I needed something to fill the void. Paints and canvas turned out to be good therapy." "Have you been widowed for long?" Finley asked, feeling that it wasn't a very tactful question, but genuinely interested. "7 years ago," Margaret replied without apparent bitterness. "Robert was ill for a long time. His passing was expected. It doesn't make the loss any easier, but it gives you time to prepare." Finley nodded understandingly. He too had experienced a kind of loss, not death, but the end of a relationship, the destruction of what he thought would last forever. After dinner, Ethan and Clara left early, saying they needed to check on their daughter, and winked openly at Finley. He and Margaret were left alone, finishing their wine on the porch and looking up at the stars. "Ethan told me about your move," Margaret began cautiously. "It must have been a difficult decision to leave everything behind and start over." Finley looked at her in surprise. People usually avoided such topics on a first meeting. "It is," he admitted, "but sometimes we don't have a choice. Or rather, we always have a choice, but some options seem unbearable. Like staying somewhere you no longer feel needed," Margaret nodded. "I understand. After Robert died, our house felt so empty that I sold it and moved into a smaller apartment. My friends thought it was a rash decision, but I couldn't stay there." "Exactly." Finley was surprised at how accurately she had captured his feelings. "It's not the surroundings, it's the feelings they evoke." They talked for hours, about books, movies, travel, work, children. Finley couldn't remember the last time he had had such an easy conversation with someone he didn't know very well. He felt comfortable with Margaret, both when they were silent and when they talked. When she got ready to leave, Finley offered to walk her home. It was a warm night and they decided to walk. Margaret's apartment was only 15 minutes away. "Thanks for tonight," she said when they reached her house. "It was really nice getting to know you better." "Likewise," Finley replied sincerely. "Maybe we can do this again sometime. There's a new exhibition in town if you like art." "I'd love to," Margaret smiled. "Call me over the weekend." On his way home, Finley felt a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if a heavy burden that had been weighing on his shoulders for months had been lifted. He wasn't ready for a new relationship, nor was he thinking about one. But the idea of friendship with Margaret, the opportunity to talk to someone who seemed to intuitively understand his feelings, was appealing. Over the next few weeks, they met several more times. They went to an exhibition, had dinner at a small Italian restaurant, and took a walk in the park. Each meeting strengthened their bond, which was based on mutual respect and understanding. On their fifth date, Margaret invited Finley to her place for dinner. Her apartment reflected her personality, cozy but elegant, with bookshelves lining the walls and several of her own paintings hanging on the walls. "Are these your work?" Finley asked, looking at a landscape painting of a mountain lake. "Yes," Margaret nodded. "Nothing special, just a hobby." "They're beautiful," Finley said sincerely. "You have real talent." Margaret smiled shyly, and at that moment Finley felt a strange excitement. He wanted to touch her, take her hand, but he held back, unsure if such a gesture would be appropriate. Dinner was warm and pleasant. They talked about their children, their work — Margaret was a school psychologist — and the books they had recently read. After dinner, over a cup of tea, the conversation became more personal. "I wanted to ask," Margaret began, "have you thought about going back to Edgewood, to visit your family?" Finley shook his head. "Not ready. Too many memories." "I understand," she nodded. "Sometimes it takes time for wounds to heal. But you know what I realized after Robert died? That the pain never goes away completely. It becomes part of you, changes you. You just learn to live with it and move on." Finley stared thoughtfully into his cup. "You're a wise woman, Margaret." "Not wise, just experienced," she smiled. "Life teaches us to accept what we cannot change and change what we can." That evening, as she walked him to the door, Margaret suddenly stood on tiptoe and kissed him lightly on the cheek. Finley froze in surprise. "Good night, Finley," she said softly. "See you soon." The next 2 months flew by like a single day. Finley and Margaret saw each other almost every day. They went to the movies, walked around town, cooked dinner together, or just sat and talked. Gradually, their relationship grew from friendship into something more. Their first real kiss happened during a walk along the waterfront. Spontaneous, tender, awakening feelings in Finley that he thought he would never feel again. Ethan and Clara enthusiastically supported their relationship. Little Lily, their daughter, adored Grandpa Finn and Grandma Meg, as she called them, and often asked them both to come visit her. One day, when they were all having dinner at Ethan and Clara's house, Valerie, Margaret's daughter from her first marriage, a successful 27-year-old journalist living in Seattle, called. "Mom, I have news," she said excitedly, after exchanging greetings. "Brian proposed to me. We're getting married in June." After congratulations and enthusiastic exclamations, Valerie asked to speak to her mother alone. Margaret went into another room. When she returned, her face was beaming with happiness. "Valerie wants to know if you'll come to the wedding," she told Finley. "Of course, if you want me to," he replied, a little surprised. He had only seen Valerie a couple of times when she came to visit her mother. "The thing is," Margaret looked excited, "she wants you to walk her down the aisle." Finley froze. The room suddenly became very quiet. Ethan and Clara looked at him with tense anticipation. "Me?" he finally managed. But why? She has a father. Stepfather, Margaret corrected, and they were never close. He was hardly involved in her life after the divorce, and her biological father died when she was 2. But we've only known each other for a few months. Finley still couldn't believe it. Why did she choose me? Because she sees how you've changed my life, Margaret replied simply. How you've made me happy. And because, she faltered. I told her your story, about how you raised a girl who wasn't yours as your own for 20 years, about how you left when you were betrayed, about how you found the strength to start your life over. Finley sat silently, stunned. The story he had perceived as a personal tragedy was, in someone else's eyes, a story of strength and dignity. You don't have to agree, Margaret said gently. Valerie will understand. Finley looked at Ethan, whose eyes expressed support, at Clara, smiling at him, at little Lily playing with blocks on the floor. Suddenly, he remembered Ella, her first day of school, her first tooth, her first broken heart. He remembered reading her bedtime stories, teaching her to ride a bike, how proud he was of her achievements. He remembered the pain of betrayal when she chose Weston, the man who had abandoned her as a baby. And he remembered their recent conversations, the gradual restoration of their relationship, her sincere remorse. Tell her it would be an honor for me, he finally said. Margaret beamed, hugging him. I knew you would agree. It means so much to her, and to me. That evening, when they returned home, Finley sat on the porch for a long time, looking at the stars. Life had prepared a strange, symbolic twist for him. Once again, he would lead a girl who was not his own to the altar. But this time, everything was different. There was no betrayal, no broken promises, only honesty, respect, and sincere affection. Finley took out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. Finley? Tess's voice sounded uncertain with a hint of hope. Is that really you? Yes, it's me, he replied. How are you? I'm fine, as well as I can be, her voice faltered. I miss you, every day. Finley sighed. Despite everything that had happened, her voice still resonated with pain and tenderness. I'm calling to tell you that I filed for divorce, he said softly. You'll get the papers next week. There was silence. Finley could almost see her clutching the phone, trying to hold back tears. I understand, Tess finally said. It's the right thing to do. I ruined everything and I'm sorry. I don't blame you, Finley said sincerely. Not anymore. 20 years is a long time. People change. Feelings change. I just want you to be happy, Tess. I mean it. What about you? She asked quietly. Are you happy? Finley looked at the house where Margaret's silhouette was visible in the living room window, arranging the wildflowers they had picked that afternoon in vases. Yes, he replied. I've met someone, a good person. She understands me. I'm happy for you, Tess said, her voice sincere but tinged with sadness. You deserve happiness more than anyone I know. After their conversation, Finley felt a strange sense of relief. It was as if the last thread connecting him to his past had been severed, giving him the freedom to move forward without looking back. Margaret came out onto the porch carrying 2 cups of hot tea. She sat down next to him and silently handed him a cup. I called Tess, Finley said. I told her about the divorce. Margaret nodded, expressing neither joy nor condemnation, just understanding. How do you feel? She asked. Free, Finley replied honestly. Like I've closed a door behind me, leaving behind pain and happiness and 20 years of my life. It's strange to feel sadness and relief at the same time. There's nothing strange about mixed feelings, Margaret said gently. Life is rarely black and white. They sat on the porch, holding hands and looking at the stars. Finley's mind was spinning with thoughts of the past and the future, of losses and gains, of how strange life is. Taking one thing away, it always gives something in return. What are you thinking about? Margaret asked, noticing his thoughtfulness. About the twists and turns that fate sometimes throws at us, Finley replied. 6 months ago, I thought my life was over. And now, Margaret looked at him with warmth and hope. And now I realize that it's just beginning, Finley smiled, squeezing her hand tighter. And I'm grateful for this new chance. For you. The moon rose slowly over Portland, bathing the rooftops, trees, and two elderly people who had found comfort and a new beginning in each other in silvery light. Ahead of them lay Valerie's wedding, where Finley would walk down the aisle with the girl who had become almost family to him over the past few months. And then, who knows? Maybe the travels Margaret and he had often talked about, maybe a home together, maybe just quiet evenings with a book and a cup of tea. Life went on, opening up new horizons, and Finley Morrow was ready to face the future with an open heart and without fear.